Okay, so the last technology I'm going to cover in this section is called ECMAScript for XML, and it's typically known by its abbreviated name E4X. ECMAScript for XML, or E4X, is an international standard. It's defined by the ECMA 357 specification that was adopted back in December of 2005. And the whole purpose behind ECMAScript for XML is to add support for XML as a first-class data type in ECMAScript, which forms the basis for languages like JavaScript and ActionScript if you've ever used Flash or Flex. The real power of ECMAScript is that it lets me treat XML as a built-in data type. So you see the example I've got here, where I've got a line of code declaring a variable named J and setting it to the numerical value 3, or a variable like myString and setting it to a string variable. Using E4X, I can do something like this. I can declare a variable named myXML and just set it to XML code right in the script without having to do any DOM manipulation or any other kind of fancy tricks. This is a very powerful feature, and it's one of the great things about ECMAScript as a scripting language is that it provides this kind of support for working with XML. Its whole purpose, as I said, is to allow you to work with XML as a native data type. So where can you find an implementation of E4X? Well, the known implementations as of this recording, Firefox 1.5 and later has native support built in for E4X. IE does not support this technology yet. Adobe ActionScript version 3 and later, which is present in Flash, Creative Suite 3, and Adobe Air and Adobe Flex, as well as Acrobat version 8 and later, both in the Reader and in the full Acrobat versions, and version 1.6 of the Rhino version of the JavaScript interpreter engine, as well as Aptana's Jaxer Ajax application server, which uses the Mozilla code on the back end on the server. These are so far some of the better known implementations. So if you're using Firefox, or if you're writing code in ActionScript version 3 or later, you can use E4X in your code. So there's two main ways of creating XML using E4X. The first, which we've already seen, is to just assign XML code directly to a variable in your script. The second way is to use the XML object as a constructor using the new XML operator. And this is what both examples look like. So you've seen the first one already in the previous slide where I've got a variable and I'm assigning just some XML code straight to it. The second example down here is using the XML constructor. Both of these are functionally equivalent. You can use either one of these. The new XML syntax is obviously a bit more object-oriented, so if that's your preference, you can go that way. But either one of these is perfectly fine and valid. What's nice about E4X is the way that it interacts with JavaScript native types. So you can evaluate JavaScript expressions using the brace syntax, and I've got an example of that here. Suppose I had a variable name which contained a text string, and I wanted to have that inserted into XML based on an expression evaluation. I can do that using the brace syntax as you've seen here. So if I write something like var myXML, and using E4X, I just type out some XML code, and I put the name of this JavaScript variable inside these two braces, then the result will be as if that variable name gets substituted using the contents of that variable in the XML. This is a really powerful way of working with XML code and mixing it with JavaScript logic. E4X provides several ways of accessing content that's in XML. So it's very straightforward, and the good news is you use common JavaScript syntax in order to do it. So for example, the bracket and dot operators work the same way for E4X content as they do for objects. The operator, which is a syntax that's borrowed from XPath, is used to access attributes on a tag, and we'll be seeing live examples of this in a few moments. You can also use arbitrary selectors. For example, if you have an element that has attributes on it, and you've got multiple of these elements with attributes, you can do some basic filtering, like checking to see if an attribute is equal to a certain value to filter out the selection of certain nodes in your E4X XML content, which is really cool, and we'll see how that works. You can also use some built-in functions like length to see how many child tags a parent tag has. Creating XML content in E4X is also really easy and straightforward. And in fact, one of the main sources of the power of E4X comes from the way it starts to blur the line between what's a JavaScript object and what is XML content. So, for example, you can use JavaScript operators like the brackets I've already shown. You can also use the plus equal syntax, etc., to create new content in the XML. You can also modify the XML data directly in place by placing an E4X expression on the left-hand side of an assignment operator. So imagine I had a bunch of XML content in E4X format, and I wrote my XML.title. Imagine there's a title element, and I set it to this string. I would actually modify the contents of that XML element directly in place by using common JavaScript notation. Deleting XML content is also really straightforward. You just use the delete keyword. For example, if I had XML content and I wanted to delete the title element, I would just simply type delete my XML.title, and the title element, or all of them, if there was more than one, would be gone. I can also delete individual attributes by using the @ syntax. So for example, to delete the name attribute from the title, I would simply write delete my XML.title.@name. And as I mentioned earlier, you can delete multiple instances of a given element by just referring to the name of the tag. So a couple of things to note about E4X and the way it interoperates with the DOM. It's important to note that E4X content are XML objects. They're not DOM objects. So E4X content and DOM XML are not the same. The reason for this is because E4X creates its own object types, and they don't directly operate with the DOM API that's provided in the browser. However, we can be clever about this in a couple of ways. You can achieve some measure of interoperability by using the toString operator on the E4X content, and then you can go ahead and pass that to a DOM parser object, which will create a DOM representation of the XML code for you. Because remember, using the DOM parser, we can create XML content directly from strings. As long as we have a string that we can pass to a parser, we can create a fully formed DOM document. And remember, going in the opposite direction, you can serialize a DOM document to a string using the XML serializer class, and you can pass that to the XML constructor to create E4X content. Okay, so I think we've reached the point now where we've had enough theory. Let's go ahead and look at E4X in action.